Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. Around the Empire podcast is listener-supported independent media. Pitch in if you can, patreon.com/aroundtheempire or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Also, please like, share, and subscribe on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/aroundtheempire. Ivan Katchanovski joins us today to talk about his vast research and his detailed and prolific writings and presentations on the Maidan protests and the 2014 Maidan Massacre in Ukraine. Dr. Ivan Katchanovski is a political scientist. His research focuses on politics, conflicts, policy and political communication in Ukraine, the U.S., and Canada. He teaches at the University of Ottawa. He was a visiting scholar at the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies at Harvard University. He was a visiting assistant professor at the Department of Politics at the State University of New York of Potsdam, and he was a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Toronto and a postdoctoral fellow at the Library of Congress. He received his Ph.D. from George Mason University. He's a prolific researcher and writer in his publications, which can be found on his University of Ottawa website and elsewhere, and his interviews and comments have appeared in numerous media outlets internationally. We recorded this on December 5th, 2019. Professor Ivan Katchanovski joins us today from Ottawa in Canada. Welcome to the show, Professor Katchanovski. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation. It is a pleasure to participate in your program.
Dr. Katchanovski has done a lot of research on the Maidan and on the Maidan Massacre, the sniper killings that happened, the 100 martyrs. It was more well known as at the time. And we're going to focus in on that today. Of course, he's done research on a much broader subject too, but in the time that we have, I thought that we might focus on that. But before we do that, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, since the audience might be meeting you for the first time?
I am a professor at the University of Ottawa in Canada. I got my Ph.D. from George Mason University in the United States in 2002, and I was teaching and doing research in various academic positions in several universities, including Harvard University, State University of New York at Potsdam, the University of Toronto, and also I work at the Library of Congress at the Kluge Center for Scholars. And I publish and I do research about Ukraine. Ukraine is the main area of my research, and I'm originally from Ukraine.
Oh, okay. So you are originally from Ukraine. And what part of Ukraine did you come from? Or maybe it was more parts than one. I don't know.
Well, this is very important because I'm from Western Ukraine, and actually I published my dissertation on regional political divisions and conflicts and separatism in Ukraine. And Western Ukraine is very different from Eastern Ukraine, which is now in the midst of conflict, because Western Ukraine is traditionally very nationalistic, very pro-Western in terms of orientation, while Eastern Ukraine is more pro-Russian and supported Communist Party when Soviet Union, when Soviet Union was in existence, and after independence in 1991, after Ukraine became independent in 1991.
Okay, that is important, that you actually came from the region of Ukraine where a lot of the subjects that you studied, particularly the battalions and the different fighting groups, actually where they came from. So you really are familiar with the culture there and everything. That is important. Yeah. So, I mean, just so you know, I think the audience is aware of the Maidan protests and the massacres and the war in Donbass, though I'm not sure that everybody really understands it that well. And I myself, sort of by chance, was watching. Well, there were live streams that were available. I think it was Espresso or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah, there was like a stationary camera in the square, Maidan Square there, and then some other film was available. Though for a non-Ukrainian or non-Russian speaker, it was hard to follow, even though there was a lot of coverage in the social media and the online. I'm not quite sure how well the mainstream media followed it. So I could see a lot of things, but I couldn't always understand what was being said. Over time, I found some English speakers who were in the area, and that's when I first became aware of Mark Sloboda, for example. And there was so I could follow what they were saying on Twitter, and I could get some information. There was another guy, there was a British guy who was, I guess he was there in the Maidan. I know he was there in the early days of the war in Donbass. I can't remember. I think his name was Graham something. So anyway, he had some English commentary too. But so I did follow it, though I did not always understand what I was looking at. And I have followed it since. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Maidan protests in, well, they began, I guess, in the fall of 2013, but they really ramped up in early 2014. And then it was in February is the period of time that we're going to focus on, when the shooting began, when the violence really, when things got really bad, and when the government was actually removed. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Maidan, just as an introduction? I know it's a big subject, but just a little bit of background, if you would.
Yes, basically Maidan was a mass protest movement, which started as a protest against a decision by then President of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, to abandon a temporary agreement of free trade and association with the European Union, which he promised to sign, but then suddenly reversed his decision after he found that this would not be as beneficial as he believed it would be initially. Right. And in response to this, there was a protest on the main squares in Kiev, downtown Kiev, which is capital of Ukraine. But initially, protest was quite small compared to what happened later. And key event in Maidan happened on November, in the last day of November, when just few hundred of people were left on the main square. And they were basically leaving the square, so this was supposed to be last day of protest. But then suddenly, at 4 a.m., there were clashes with police. Basically, police, anti-riot police, violently dispersed Maidan protesters, and this led to much bigger anti-government protests, which ended with a massacre on February 20th and February 18th of 2014. But I actually have now a new article, which will be a published peer review article on Maidan, and specifically far-right involvement on Maidan and Maidan Massacre. And what I found using my research, actually I found that this was not just what it seemed to be initially when I also was watching this live via online when this happened, like most other events during Maidan. But actually what I found that this was actually a provocation which was set up by some oligarchs who had a conflict with Yanukovych, specifically the head of his presidential administration, and opposition, including far-right opposition. They knew in advance about this dispersal, so they specifically set up such a provocation by putting right sector members in the square, and they clashed with police, and police afterwards, according to different sources, is on their own in reaction to this violence and clashes and attacks from far-right organizations and activists against them, or because of specific order from the head of presidential administration, became very violent and beat up very violently protesters who remain on the square. And this was televised by the main television channel. And this happened at 4 a.m. So that's why this was not accidental, because afterwards, on December 1st, you have a few hundred thousands of people going and starting mass protest against the government, and this still continued for almost entire winter, when suddenly, in the end of February, on February 18th and then on February 20th, there was mass murder taking place in downtown Kiev. This is also area of my main research. So I study these issues and I follow these issues, and now I have a lot of videos which I published, and also I have peer-reviewed article which would be forthcoming, and I hope to publish a book on this topic, on this issue, because this was a key issue which led not only to change of the government, to basically violent overthrow of Yanukovych government, which was relatively pro-Russian, but basically was corrupt and associated with oligarchs. And this also led to start of the civil war in Donbass and Russian military intervention in Donbass in support of separatists, but also to Russian annexation of Crimea, which is also was very pro-Russian region and supported separatists in various forms before these events took place. And in addition to this, this Maidan massacre escalated into conflict between Russia and the West. So this is now, if you're talking about impeachment, so UK now became a #1 topic in the US news, and this is actually goes back to the Maidan massacre and events which took place, because everything escalated from this conflict. So that's why this is a very important and very crucial event which took place in Ukraine and now affects American politics, as we watch this right now unfolding in Washington, D.C. in terms of impeachment against Donald Trump.
Right. I mean, at the time it was a big event, but I don't know if anyone could have predicted how consequential that overthrow of the government in Ukraine would have been. Although I can remember at the time thinking, this is more than just one country, because we had people like Zbigniew Brzezinski saying, well, if we could get control of Ukraine, that would be the real prize, and that would prevent Russia from ever becoming an empire again. They would just be a regional power. So there were always some strategic goals of, bringing Ukraine into alliance with the United States and NATO. But it's done way more than that. It's now set us on a course potentially for a world war, which is what scares me so much. And like you said, the current impeachment process, for people who aren't familiar with what Professor Katchanovski is talking about, he's talking about the fact that the new leaders of Ukraine, the post-Maidan leaders, were very much in alignment with the Democratic Party, and they were used. Well, first of all, they wanted to make sure that they really preferred Hillary Clinton, because they knew that she would continue the policies that were friendly toward Ukraine. They were afraid that Donald Trump was pro-Russia and it would change everything for the new people in power, the post-Maidan people in power, but also the political parties here in the United States, made use of some of their friends in Ukraine to basically to meddle in the 2016 election, to try to make sure that Hillary would win. So that's being denied here in the United States. That's being called a conspiracy theory, but it's a well-documented fact. So yes, it's so true what you just said, that the things that happened during the Maidan are really a central issue in United States foreign policy. And I think it would have been hard to predict before the 2013 period that things could have turned out this way.
Yeah, I actually wrote popular publications during Maidan, in which I argued that this conflict and violence which has started on Maidan can escalate into breakup of Ukraine, into civil war in Ukraine, and it would affect other countries. But I myself did not predict that obviously this would lead to such a big conflict between Russia and the West, specifically the United States, and would also affect impeachment of Donald Trump. But this was a very important issue, because I researched the issues. I researched political violence in Ukraine. I researched conflicts in Ukraine before they were topics in the news. This was a very important area of my study, and I wrote dissertation on this topic, and later published this as a book.
Oh, okay. Well, I look forward to the newer book that you're going to write on this, because it is such an important thing. And at the time, if you kind of bring people back to what the mindset was in 2014, like the thought of war between the United States and Russia was most people were like, "Oh, that's crazy. That'll never happen." Uh, but I can remember at the time thinking, we've got some we've as you know, we've got some extremely pro-war political policy people here, and it did occur to me that this could drive us down the road toward a world war, but I still didn't quite think it was kind of outlandish. It was an outlandish thing, an outlandish idea, and here we are today. Look where we are today.
Yes, but this is also important because I came from a region of Ukraine, and my family like has experience of both World War One and World War Two. And my mother lived in 5 countries without moving on her own. So this was because of politics, and they survived both World War One and World War Two. It was very close and very difficult. So I grew up with these stories, and which were told by my mother, by my grandmother about World War One and World War Two. And this is why I became interested in these topics, including political violence and a study of the conflicts, which is again has also personal connection. But I could never imagine again that this would be possibility of repeating in terms of a major conflict between kind of major nuclear powers in the world, which is still now going on. But I personally do not think this is very likely that such conflict would turn into nuclear war. But this is a very dangerous time right now because of this potential for escalation of the conflict, which can escalate and very difficult to predict, and it's always better to avoid. Unfortunately, this conflict was not avoided in case of Ukraine, and now we see consequences of its escalation.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And my family, my father was trained. He was in the process still training when World War II ended. So, but my family didn't go through the kind of turmoil that yours did. But even so, I think it's absolutely crazy to even think about a war with Russia, and for 100 reasons. But yeah, that motivates me too. I mean, I'm actually astonished that it seems like so many Americans and Canadians. I mean, there's a large Ukrainian diaspora in Canada, and a lot of them seem to be really, really anti-Russia and not so worried about us ending up in another world war. And there are a lot of Americans too. I mean, just isn't anybody thinking about what this could turn into? I mean, I don't understand it.
Yes, this is actually an issue because in the U.S. media and politicians, when they talk about the war, it often is presented as something which happens in other countries. So I was actually in Washington, D.C. After doing my Ph.D. I was living and working in Washington, D.C. And when war against Iraq started, this was just happening on television. This was like a computer game in which you see planes throwing bombs from very high distance and they explode. So this was very kind of sanitized version of a war. But if actually people would experience this war firsthand, if their houses would be destroyed, if their lives would be put in danger, which happens now in Ukraine and happened in during World War One and World War Two, like with my own family. So this will be again a very different perspective on the war and dangers of such conflict.
Well, I'm glad that you're doing research to bring out the truth about this, because maybe it will open more people's eyes and they'll have a better understanding of what happened. So I think what you said was that you now realize, due to your research, that the Maidan protests were orchestrated by some Ukrainian oligarchs. Is that the conclusion you came to?
No, this was there were different forces taking place. One force, major force, which financed Maidan protests and provided television support because oligarchs on most important television stations in Ukraine were oligarchs because they were in conflict with Yanukovych over money and property. So this was basically business conflict, which led to decisions by oligarchs to support opposition to Yanukovych and specifically Maidan protests. And another faction, major faction during Maidan protests were opposition political parties, which were kind of, many of them were also supported by oligarchs, but they were generally pro-Western political parties, and Yanukovych party was generally pro-Russian political party, and Maidan parties were mostly supported by in the western and central Ukraine, while Yanukovych party of regions was supported in the east and the south. So Kiev was located in the center of Ukraine, so it was not typical of entire Ukraine, and Ukraine was very regionally divided before Maidan, and it's still regionally divided afterwards. So this was a very important issue. And another major faction which took place in Ukraine, or actors which took place, which were participating in mass protests during Maidan, and specifically in violence, were far-right organizations, which became very strong actors because of their reliance on violence. They were quite limited in terms of their numbers, but they were able to exercise a very important role during Maidan, and in particular during Maidan Massacre, because of their use of violence.
And now, were the far-right fighters, the neo-Nazi fighters, and the other right-wing fighters, they were backed by oligarchs, right?
At the time, it's not clear. After Maidan led to change of the government, the oligarchs became openly supportive of far-right organizations, but opposition initially tried to distance themselves from far-right. So this was main opposition leaders. They publicly said they would not support far-right organizations, but it is still unknown behind the scene if they supported like privately without publicly acknowledging this. But key moment in terms of alliance between far-right organizations and mainstream opposition parties, Maidan parties in Ukraine, took place in January or mid-January of 2014, when far-right parties basically led violence against police using Molotov cocktails initially and stones and so on to attack police. And this was at the time when mainstream Maidan opposition started to embrace far-right and violence tactics that they employed. And this later escalated into Maidan Massacre, which was basically also involved far-right and also mainstream political parties in Ukraine in terms of Maidan opposition.
Right. Now, there were three men who you introduced in the beginning of your section on the Maidan Massacre. The commandant of the Maidan self-defense unit. So they were, I can remember seeing there were lots of just civilians, just the public out. There was a big stage, and but there were noticeable little fighting units, and I guess these were called. Were they organized into what you called Maidan companies? Were they?
Yes, they were companies of Maidan self-defense.
Right, and then there was a commandant or a leader of the whole self-defense, and that was
Andrei Parubi.
That was Parubi, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Then you had the right sector guy, the Dmitry Yarash, right? And then there's Alexander Turchnyov, which I'm probably mispronouncing these things. Forgive me for that. What role was Turchnyov playing?
So he was a leader of Fatherland political party in the absence of Yulia Tymoshenko, who was imprisoned at the time.
Oh, right.
On charges of abuse of the office by Yanukovych government. So she was absent, and Turchynov was actually one of the leaders of Maidan, became one of the leaders of Maidan. But according to various sources, he was much more powerful than just to be one of the leaders. He actually became president of Ukraine after Maidan Massacre. So there is suggestions that he was actually the one who was kind of in charge of organizing Maidan, and also in a kind of a variety of events which and everything which took place during Maidan. So this is kind of again very typical for Ukrainian politics to have some facade like Potemkin village, and behind the facade there are a lot of other kind of real events and action events which are hidden from outsiders. So it's necessary to know all this taking place outside of facade, and that's why it's very difficult to see what's going on in Ukrainian politics just by looking into media or just looking into kind of image which is projected by politicians and so on.
Now, at the time, Yanukovych was being told not to crack down on the protesters. He was President Obama was, I don't know if he was exactly threatening, but he was warning him, not to use any violence on them. So For a period of time, we saw the protesters actually provoking some of the police. There would these be large units of police, and they had some trucks and things like that. And there were Molotov cocktails being thrown at them, but they were not hitting back. And then at one point, they did crack down, right?
Yes, there was this combination of clashes with police that took place on February 18, when there was so-called peaceful march to basically led by Maidan opposition, political parties, by Maidan self-defense in particular, and by the right sector, to go to the parliament, and then clashes started during the parliament. So this was actually during attempt to take control over the parliament by Maidan opposition, because police protected the parliament, and afterwards police started to try to clean Maidan from opposition protesters. So they were very close to kind of taking control over Maidan Square, which was where Maidan stage was located, and where all the leadership of Maidan was located, and where all the Maidan protesters were stationed. But this ended because they stopped. Basically, they were stopped in the middle. They were not able to do this because of use of firearms, or basically of live ammunition fire against police. This was the real reason, according to my research and a variety of sources, why police, basic and security services, special units were not able to kind of to take control over Maidan Square because of because opposition snipers and opposition in general started to use live ammunition against the police and security forces and internal troops.
And their locations are important, right? The Maidan protesters had control of several buildings.
Yes, this was important because the Maidan protesters not only had control over squares, they had control over several buildings which were near the square. This is like main square, downtown. This is like Times Square, similar to New York. So this was like the most important place, most visited place in Kyiv, very popular place. And buildings which surrounded this place were occupied either by Maidan protesters, or they were like hotels. But hotels like Hotel Ukraina and Kozatsky Hotel, actually, according to my research, they were also under control of Maidan forces. In particular, Svoboda took control over Hotel Ukraina, which was one of the locations of snipers who shot both at police and Maidan protesters during Maidan Massacre.
So this is what you've dug into. You've looked at interviews with, I don't know, 100 witnesses. You've gone through all kinds of live stream footage and other kinds of research that you've done. And while it was the way it was presented here in Western media was that the Ukrainian police, killed 100 protesters, and that became the signature moment. They were the 100 martyrs. American politicians went over there, and there were memorials to them with flowers and other types of items where people would pay their respects to them. But as it turns out, the story was a lot more complicated as to who shot all of these people, right?
Yes, I did a lot of research looking into all publicly available sources, and now still this is ongoing Maidan Massacre trial, which produces a lot of evidence, a lot of testimonies by people who participated in these events, from the police, from Maidan protesters, specifically wounded ones, and all the evidence, like videos, radio intercepts of police and security forces, which I analyzed, interviews, which analyzed Maidan Massacre trial, and with investigation results and forensic evidence, which was made public during this Maidan Massacre trial, which is broadcast on YouTube, and which is available publicly, actually shows that this was not what it was publicly shown by the media and reported by the media and by politicians, and also mentioned even during impeachment hearings, when there was a kind of a reference to Maidan Massacre by government snipers of 100 Maidan protesters. Actually, my research shows with a lot of evidence that this was opposite. Actually, that Maidan snipers in Maidan controlled buildings which surrounded Maidan Square actually massacred both police initially and then Maidan protesters. So this was a so-called false flag operation, which was specifically designed to create impression and blame government forces and undermine legitimacy of Yanukovych government in order to overthrow this government, because in open conflict with government forces, Maidan forces were not able to win, because government control a lot of ammunition, a lot of security units, and a lot of police units, and had ammunition and so on, and weapons, which far exceeded the capacity of Maidan opposition. But by using this violence and by blaming Yanukovych government and his forces for the massacre, they were able to overthrow Yanukovych government by using such tactic, basically using mass killing of their own protesters in order to seize power in Ukraine, and they also killed policemen during this massacre.
Right, and I mean there have been people who have come out over the years. There's been a lot of suspicion that there were Andrei Parubi's various units who had snipers in these buildings and were shooting protesters and the police. And I also remember, I don't know if you remember this, or I think this was authentic, but there was a phone call. There was a doctor who had treated some of the people who were shot, and she told someone that the bullets were, that both the police and the protesters were killed with the same bullets. But then that phone call seemed to have disappeared. I'm trying to, I don't remember the specifics of it, but I think it may have been an ambassador. It may have someone from Estonia talking to someone from the European Union. Do you remember that by any chance?
Yes, I just published my new video appendix with interviews of over 80 witnesses about Maidan massacre and snipers in Maidan controlled buildings. So I included this interview. This was this telephone call between Minister of Foreign Affairs of Estonia and European Union head of Foreign Affairs Ashton. So this was a very famous call, which was one of the earliest cases of evidence that this was not what it was shown to be by the media and by politicians, including specifically U.S. politicians, and which became popularized also, they became publicized by Hollywood in Winter on Fire documentary and a lot of other documentaries which were actually based on misrepresentation.
Oh, right. Yeah. Ukraine on Fire, and there's a new one, right?
Yes, this is different because this was Netflix movie, Winter on Fire.
Oh, Winter on Fire. Okay.
Yeah, basically, which was given a standard narrative of the Maidan massacre and blamed police and government snipers. Even so, all the evidence shows that this was the opposite. Was shown in the movie, and I have a lot of evidence. Even the person, very young protester who is featured in this documentary "Winter on Fire" on Netflix, actually he testified at the Maidan massacre trial just several months ago, and he publicly stated that Maidan protesters actually were talking one to another, that basically and wondering if ours are basically shooting ours. So this is like. They were talking this openly during Maidan massacre, and he mentioned specifically that they were pointing to snipers on the top of Hotel Ukraina, which was controlled by Maidan forces, and this was just events which were not mentioned and evidence which was not mentioned in this documentary, and a lot of media, like media like New York Times and CNN, they never mentioned this use of weapons by Maidan snipers. They blame government forces. And actually I found also very interesting footage from CNN, which was not broadcast, but it shows in front of a CNN correspondent who broadcast live from Maidan Square, which is main square or Independence Square, during the start of Maidan massacre on February 20th. There were about a dozen of Maidan protesters with firearms going basically to barricades and starting shooting into police. but this was never shown by CNN. So basically, CNN never shown this footage, and this was done in front of their correspondent, basically reporting from Maidan Square. So this was recorded by CNN, but it was never shown on CNN in terms of to public. And this is very common because a lot of videos which took place during Maidan Massacre, specifically Expresso broadcasts of Maidan Massacre, which I was watching live when this happened on February 20th. They were also removed from public venues like YouTube and other sources. That's why I tried to reconstruct the entire Maidan Massacre using a variety of videos and a variety of sources, but there's still a lot of evidence which is basically was destroyed or hidden because it implicates not the government forces but actually Maidan snipers shooting both police and protesters.
Yeah, it doesn't go along with the official narrative, which we see that kind of thing altogether. Any other anecdotal information that you want to talk about? Interesting bits of information that you have found?
These are like just overwhelming amount of information. So just videos like 80, over 80 witnesses basically talking about Maidan snipers in Maidan controlled buildings like Hotel Ukraina and other ones shooting into Maidan protesters and the police. And this is actually denied. So government official investigation denies that there were any snipers in these locations. And I also presented a video appendix which contains testimonies of about 45 wounded Maidan protesters. And they testified at Maidan Massacre trial and investigation about snipers shooting at them, wounding them, and other Maidan protesters. They testified that they saw snipers in this Maidan control buildings and so on. And still, prosecution basically charges police for their shooting and their wounding. Even so, they testify opposite. There is a lot of forensic evidence which is presented during this Maidan Massacre trial for the first time, which is not reported by any media, like ballistic examination results of bullets, which did not match bullets from Berkut policemen who are charged with the Maidan Massacre. But this is quite amazing. This is never was reported by any media in the West. And also forensic medical examination, which shows what this medical doctor during Maidan on Maidan, whose testimony was reported by a foreign minister of Estonia in this famous phone call. Basically, this is consistent with what she reported, because this forensic evidence shows that Maidan protesters were shot not from in front and from horizontal level, they were shot from very steep direction. Mm-hmm. Almost all of them were shot either from side, left or right side, not from the front side, from direction in which police were located, but and also many of them were shot in the back. So this is, again, they were shot from Maidan buildings and not from police on the ground. And this is supported by a variety of videos. There are videos of snipers shooting into Maidan protesters, shooting into police in these Maidan control buildings, which I found and also posted. There are radio intercepts which shows that the police do not have any order to massacre Maidan protesters. They were actually the ones who were targeted by Maidan snipers, and that's why they retreated from Maidan during Maidan massacre when it started. And because initially police were targeted, but they did not massacre any Maidan protesters, according to my research. So I did not find any case of Maidan protester who could be definitely said who had been shot by police, because all the evidence points to police shooting into like objects like electric poles or in the ground or in trees or in the walls of Hotel Ukraina, and these shots were above the height of Maidan protesters in the massacre. But there are evidence that the same Maidan protesters were shot from direction from the back, from Maidan control buildings like Hotel Ukraina, and shot into specifically to kill them, not to wound them, but specifically they were shot very precisely, very accurately, and this was done from close distance. And police were shooting basically with Kalashnikov, so this is not a very precise weapon, and they were shooting openly. And even this is a very simple case. It's just there is no need to even to know any about location, all this complicated stuff, because videos are available of both police and Maidan protesters who are shot. So this is a police shooting. So if and I did this by basically synchronizing such videos and putting them together. Some videos contain both police and protesters, but others ones just show one side. But if I did this by putting them together at the same time frame by using Maidan stage sound to synchronize such videos and their content, it shows that at the time when police were shooting in these videos, which were very widely broadcast of Maidan Massacre, actually protesters were not wounded and not killed, with a few exceptions. So basically they did not coincide the time when police were shooting with times when protesters were shot. So this is a very important case because this means that official government investigation in media basically say that invisible policemen who were kind of flying somewhere and basically shot Maidan protesters because Maidan protesters were shot at the times when police were not shooting and from very high directions, which is consistent with buildings, and they were shot from the side and from the top and from the back directions, not from the front and from horizontal directions. And in addition to this, I found a Belgian video, which was filmed by Belgian television correspondents from Hotel Ukraina of Maidan Massacre. This is a very famous video of Maidan Massacre. I think the most famous video of Maidan Massacre, which was shown on television, like main television networks in the United States, in Canada, France, Germany, United Kingdom, and many other countries, Poland, and so on. And this video segment, which was shown, was presented as evidence that these Maidan protesters were shot by the police because they were looking basically and trying to protect themselves from the front by shields, metal shields and by wooden shields. But actually, video segments which were not shown, but which were made public at the Maidan Massacre trial and later which were provided to me by Belgian television for my research purposes, shows that this was not just accidental, that actually there were two Maidan protesters who were leading this group of about 10 Maidan protesters to the massacre site just few minutes before they were massacred. So this means, and these two protesters were doing this for no reason, because there was no reason to go there, but they were still leading and very insistently, very actively trying to lead and to make sure that all these Maidan protesters would go and follow them to this massacre site. But Maidan protesters in this group testified that they knew about snipers in Hotel Ukraina, so they were very worried about this. They were looking basically into kind of direction of Hotel Ukraina all the time. And later, there is a footage when bullet hits this group of people, just narrowly misses them into tree. So this is a very famous case when they are hit from the back, basically. And they turn their heads towards the Hotel Ukraina, towards the back, not to the front, towards the front in which there was location of police, but towards the back, and they very loudly shooting. Do not shoot. There are snipers shooting from the Hotel Ukraina. Do not shoot at us, and basically showing various signs to snipers there not to shoot in them. And afterwards, they they move few meters and they were massacred. Specifically, they testified in Maidan Massacre trial. They were also shot by snipers from Hotel Ukraina. So this is like just evidence, which is overwhelming evidence that this was kind of massacre by snipers located in Maidan controlled buildings and not by police, which is charged with the massacre and tried for this mass killing.
Right. Now, there's an enormous amount of material available that you have written articles. I saw that you also have presentations that you have put together, and now you have you also have a YouTube channel, and what you mentioned, you have video that you call an appendix. I suppose they go with one of these articles or presentations that you've done at conferences and such. So I will link your YouTube channel and your website so that people who want more detailed information can find that if they haven't already seen it. But before we wrap up, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I think they are publicly available, and I presented this my studies on the Maidan Massacre in major conferences, particularly in the United States, at the annual meeting of the American Political Science Association in Boston in 2008, and this multimedia presentation is available online in also APSA site, and also I presented this in conferences in Sweden in 2008 and in New York Association for Study of Nationalities, and also my first paper was presented in American Political Science Annual Meeting in San Francisco in 2015. So now this is all academic studies presented in major conferences, and now I have peer-reviewed article, published first peer-reviewed article on this topic, and I also published book chapter in academic press, which is one of the top academic presses in the United States as well.
Now, the peer-reviewed article, is that published already, or it's going to be published soon?
I just sent them confirmation. So this is now in process of publication. So it should be available online in the next few weeks. So this
okay, and I assume you will tell everyone about that on your Twitter account, right?
Yes.
Or is there one place where we should look for it?
Yes, my research is open. I use open sources which can be verified by other scholars, and this is my research is publicly available because this is an important issue and a very important event with such important consequences, not only to Ukraine, but also to many other countries, and including the United States.
Right, right. One last question. This is still a big issue, there are a lot of people in Ukraine who are still very upset about this, and they want a proper investigation and proper legal, they want, some justice for this. There have been some investigations in court cases, but there have been all these different prosecutors, and that's a complicated subject in itself. But what do you think the prospects are with the new President Zelensky, let's say, and he's got a new prosecutor, or even beyond Zelensky? What do you predict will happen? Do you think that maybe your evidence and any other research that's out there might lead to a fair investigation on this?
I'm quite skeptical that Zelensky and his prosecutor general would actually launch actual investigation of Maidan Massacre, because their public statements basically say that they repeat everything which was said by previous government under Poroshenko and under Turchinov. So they repeat official narrative of the Maidan Massacre, even so all the evidence is clear, and it's published in my studies, but not only my studies. There are like testimonies, for instance, of Georgians, 5 Georgians who were serving military, and they testify in Italian and Israeli and documentaries and in Macedonian television programs, and also to Maidan Massacre trial in their letters and testimonies. They actually the ones who witnessed the Maidan Massacre, and this massacre included participation of snipers not only from Ukraine but also from Georgia and other countries. And this is evidence which is publicly available, but it's not also. But this evidence is not investigated. Basically, they are kind of denied even opportunity to testify at the Maidan Massacre trial. Even so, they officially kind of requested such testimonies, and Maidan Massacre trial considered such testimonies, request for such testimonies. So this is actually a lot of evidence is publicly available, and I'm sure that Zelensky and Prosecutor General of Ukraine knows a lot of evidence which is not publicly available, but I think for such reason they would not be and based on their public testimonies and statements, they would not be willing and would have basically capacity and integrity to investigate Maidan Massacre, because it would find something which would be very explosive when it would be revealed, because a lot of legitimacy of the government and a lot of policies of the current government rely on Maidan Massacre and myths which were created of this massacre and events that follow. Basically, this is presented as a massacre of Maidan protesters by the police. So previous government is blamed, but now basically with a new government and new investigation, what basically has facing a choice to admit publicly, finally, that this was massacre which involved leaders of previous Maidan government, and this would require to start their persecution and actually investigation of actual snipers, which involve not only Ukraine but other countries. So this will be a very difficult task to undertake, and that's why I'm quite skeptical that Zelensky and current Prosecutor General office head in Ukraine would be willing to do this.
Yeah, that makes sense. Although it's very sad, but I'm glad to see that you're, documenting it. You're going to different countries and different groups and, maybe someone in the UN will pick it up or whatever, but you're getting the information out there, which is you're organizing it well and analyzing it. And I appreciate you taking the time to share that with us. And I hope that we can follow up again in the future to talk about some more aspects of this.
Yes, thank you for the invitation. So this was, again, I'm always willing to share my research findings. They are publicly available and they are very important issues which affect a lot of people.
They sure do. Thank you so much. And I look forward to talking to you in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Special thanks to Ivan Katchanovski. Follow him on Twitter at @I_Katchanovski. Find his work at his website at University of Ottawa, uottawa.academia.edu/Ivan Katchanovski. The Around the Empire podcast is independent media. Your support's really important. Pitch in if you can, patreon.com/AroundTheEmpire or paypal.me/AroundTheEmpirePod. You can find this podcast in many ways, lots of ways to listen to it. You can find it on all mobile podcast apps or on the website aroundtheempire.com, on Patreon or on YouTube, youtube.com/AroundTheEmpire. If you're listening on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe. Follow on Twitter @AroundTheEmpire, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.